Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. We start from Afghanistan, where nearly 100 Taliban fighters and Afghan army soldiers have been killed in the last 24 hours. Both sides claim to have caused heavy damage during fighting in 18 of the country's provinces. Taliban spokesperson Zabiullah says fighters mounted 45 attacks, wounding 39 Afghan security officials. The Afghan army says their forces carried 25 operations and 13 airstrikes against the Taliban. The army says 6 other Taliban fighters have been wounded in the attack. Meanwhile, the Afghan government has finalized its list of delegates for a meeting with the Taliban in China to discuss the intra-Afghan peace process. On Monday, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani agreed to meet the Taliban in Beijing after talking with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Ghani's spokesperson Siddiqui said this meeting could make a way for a broader dialogue between the two sides. Siddiqui said the Afghan government will soon share its list of delegates with the Chinese government. The spokesperson said the meeting's date will be announced by Beijing soon. Meanwhile, the Taliban have yet to make any comment on peace talks with the Afghan government in China. The U.S. House of Representatives Intelligence Committee will open public hearings in its impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump next week. The House is investigating whether Trump abused the powers of his office by pressurizing Ukraine for personal political gain.
The top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, William Taylor, and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, George Kent, will testify on November 13, while former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, will appear on November 15.
Those open hearings will be an opportunity for the American people to evaluate the witnesses for themselves, to make their own determinations about the credibility of the witnesses, but also to learn firsthand about the facts of the president's misconduct.
If the House votes to approve the articles of impeachment, the Republican-controlled Senate would then hold a trial on whether to remove Trump from office.
U.S. President Donald Trump and his Turkish counterpart Tayyip Erdogan will meet in Washington on November the 13th. The two leaders decided to meet after discussing the latest situation in northeastern Syria on the phone. Trump said Erdogan told him Turkey has captured ISIS terrorists, including the wife and sister of al-Baghdadi. The U.S. president said, among other topics, they discussed ending hostilities with the Kurds. Meanwhile, Erdogan said both leaders spoke of bilateral trade goals and the fight against terrorism. The meeting comes amid strong pressure by U.S. Republican and Democratic senators on Trump to levy more sanctions on Ankara. In Syria, Russian airstrikes have killed 6 civilians in northwestern Idlib province. A war monitor says 20 others were wounded in the attack. Idlib is the last major rebel-held bastion in Syria after 8 years of war. The monitor says more than 500 people have been killed by coalition airstrikes and shelling in the area since late April. Israel says it is assisting Syrian Kurds who are affected by Turkish military operations. Deputy Foreign Minister Zipi Hotoveli says Tel Aviv sees them as a counterweight to Iranian influence and is advocating for them in talks with the U.S. Turkey launched its operation against Kurdish fighters after the U.S. withdrew troops from northern Syria in early October. Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister told Parliament the offer to assist Syrian Kurds had been taken up. Syrian Kurdish officials could not immediately be reached for the comment.
Israel indeed has a salient interest in preserving the strength of the Kurds and the additional minorities in the North Syria area, as moderate and pro-Western elements who proved their utility many times over the years, especially during the fighting against ISIS.
Israel has maintained discreet military, intelligence and business ties with the Kurds since the 1960s. Now moving on, in Libya, 2 policemen have been killed in an airstrike on a police station in the suburbs of Tripoli. The Interior Ministry says 4 other people were wounded in the attack. It blamed the Eastern forces led by Khalifa Haftar for the assault. According to the UN, over 500 people have been killed since the start of the Tripoli offensive in April. At least 3 people killed and 15 others wounded when Iraq's security forces used live fire to disperse protesters gathered on a bridge in central Baghdad. Baghdad has been hit by the biggest wave of anti-government demonstrations in decades.
Thousands are taking part in anti-government demonstrations in the capital and southern provinces. Protesters blocked Ahrar, Shuhada, and Bab al-Muaddam bridges to bring the country to a standstill. They also blocked the entrance to the Nasiriyah oil refinery in southern Iraq, prompting a fuel shortage. A government official says the oil refinery blockade has cost the country over $6 billion. Meanwhile, the U.S. has condemned the killing and kidnapping of unarmed demonstrators.
A Saudi official says Riyadh is in talks with the Yemen's Houthi rebels in a bid to end the country's civil war. It's the first dialogue between the two sides since Saudi Arabia brokered a power-sharing deal between Yemen's government and southern separatists. There was no immediate comment from the Houthi rebels. A Saudi-led coalition has been fighting Houthi rebels in Yemen since 2015. UN says tens of thousands of people have been killed in the 4-year-long conflict. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has asked the global community to play its role in immediate lifting of siege in Indian-occupied Kashmir. PM Khan made this call in a meeting with the President of Council of States of Swiss Confederation, Jean-René Fournier, in Islamabad. In the meeting, PM Khan told René about the worsening humanitarian crisis in the valley and its grave impact on regional security. The Pakistani Prime Minister said India's illegal actions in violation of international law and UNSC resolutions are jeopardizing regional peace. René has earlier condemned blatant human rights violations in occupied Kashmir, calling for peaceful resolution of the issue. New Delhi's curfew and the communications blackout in occupied valley has now entered 95th day. The New York Times has once again highlighted the plight of women in Indian-occupied Kashmir under curfew. The leading U.S. newspaper published a report sharing the misery of women journalists, mothers, daughters and sisters in the besieged valley. It said female photojournalist was harassed by Indian forces as they threatened to assault and torture her for covering protests. Journalist Masrat Zahra refused to stay silent, saying she's one of the few voices coming out of the valley otherwise gagged by India. The report says Indian-occupied forces kidnapped females and shipped them to unknown jails with their families fearing the worst. The report said women can't leave their homes because of the fear of being abducted and harassed by the Indian soldiers. Nepal has objected to a new map released by New Delhi showing the disputed area of Kalapani as Indian territory. In a statement, Nepal's foreign ministry said the area clearly belongs to Nepal.
It said the government will not accept any unilateral decisions. The foreign ministry says border-related issues should be resolved through diplomatic channels. India released the new map following its decision to split the state of occupied Jammu and Kashmir into 2 administrative territories. On the map, India's border cuts into Kalapani, which has been a source of contention between the two countries. The conflict persists as Indian troops have been deployed in the area for more than 50 years. Pakistan and China also raised objections over India's new political map.
In the United States, Muslim Democrats Ghazala Hashmi and Abrar Umesh have made history in Virginia's elections. In a surprise victory, Hashmi unseated incumbent Republican Glenn Sturtevant in the state Senate. Meanwhile, Umesh became the youngest woman to hold elected office in Virginia's history. Umesh is also the first Muslim woman to be elected in the state. Tweeting after her victory, Hashmi said the results show the status quo is no longer accepted. 2 Muslim male Democrats, Ibrahim Samira and Sam Rasool, already serve in Virginia's General Assembly. The election has been described as a possible watershed moment for the once conservative southern state. It's a time for a short break, but coming up next in the Bulletin. 14,000-year-old mammoth trap found in Tultepak. And 80-year-old Jacinto Bonilla lifts up to 115 pounds in gym. Now moving on, fishing nets discarded at sea present one of the starkest environmental problems in the world. Not only do they contribute to the plastic trash problem, they also trap marine animals, leaving them to die slow and painful deaths. Greenpeace divers on the South African coast have revealed the truly horrifying scale of the problem. This report has the details.
These blue waters hide a dirty secret. Images captured by a marine drone show a scattered array of fishing nets and ropes. Today, this is a common sight in oceans everywhere, as such equipment is dumped into the ocean at a rate of 1 ton per minute.
When fishing gear is lost in the oceans without human involvement, it keeps on continuous fishing. So actually it's a sort of circle of death, we always name it, because the fish is getting catched by the net or by the lines. It dies, it attracts other animals, they also die in the same net or in the lines or in the hooks.
These nets create a morbid circle of death of their own. Initially, they catch small fish whose carcasses attract larger animals. Eventually, they can even trap dolphins.
We are 1,000 miles off the coast of South Africa, and finding abandoned fishing gear here, like these traps that we found, is extremely disgusting, because in such a remote place, to find it just shows that fishing is everywhere.
The UN warns 640,000 tons of fishing nets are dumped into the world's oceans every year. It is estimated to constitute 10% of marine trash worldwide. This won't be an easy problem to solve, considering 64% of marine areas lie outside any country's jurisdiction. For now, the world can only rely on good Samaritans like these divers.
Global warming and climate change are devastating planet Earth's ecosystems. In the meantime, scientists warn the world is facing a climate emergency. To combat the challenge, New Zealand is launching a satellite to monitor climate emissions. More in this report.
Climate change has become the leading global challenge for the world today. According to scientists, governments are failing to address the crisis. The crisis is threatening ecosystems worldwide. To help tackle the worsening situation, a methane measuring satellite mission will be based in New Zealand, called MethaneSat. The project is designed to detect global methane emissions, and the data it collects will be used to help combat climate change.
And I'm so pleased to be able to announce a strategic investment that will see the New Zealand government take part in its first official space mission. New Zealand has joined a global science mission that will launch a state-of-the-art science satellite called MethaneSat into space.
The Mission Control Center for the satellite is scheduled to launch in 2022.
A key feature of the agreement is that the Mission Control Centre will be located in New Zealand, and New Zealand researchers and scientists will have the opportunity to be involved in cutting-edge science at every stage of this mission.
New Zealand will invest $16.57 million in the project.
The world's first mammoth trap set by humans has been found in Mexico. Archaeologists say they found the largest mammoth remains in Tultepak. Mexico's Institute of Archaeology says the human-built pits used 14,000 years ago are evidence that the animals have been hunted. They say the traps contained a cache of 800 bones from at least 14 individual mammoths. Researchers say the pits were found during excavations on land where the government intends to build an airport. In New York City, South Brooklyn, an 80-year-old man spends his nights lifting heavy weights in a gym, hoping to compete at the CrossFit Games one day. This report has the details.
This man may have been born 80 years ago, but he works out with the energy of a teenager. Octogenarian Jacinto Bonilla called the grandfather of CrossFit in his town. He jumps the tall boxes, lifts heavy weights, and practices CrossFit in a Brooklyn gym every day.
I feel good. It gets me strong. I still feel strong. And I love competition. I love competition because competition makes you go to the gym.
Bonilla joined the gym only 10 years ago, but he has been exercising since childhood. He wants to win the title of fittest man by competing with the strongest athletes from around the world.
Before I come to the gym, I meditate on what I'm going to do. And I meditate to visualize my technique and form. And I try to stay as close to technique and form as I go along.
In the gym, his trainers say he has already become an example for the rest of the community. And if you ask him about his secret, he says rest and eat well. Bonilla says the most important thing to remember is to keep going.
Thank you.
Lows on the highs of the business world now. The first Chinese freight train from Xi'an to Europe has reached Turkey after crossing Istanbul's undersea Bosphorus rail tunnel. The train arrived in Ankara, where Turkish and Chinese officials were there to welcome it. Turkey's Transport Minister Mammoth called it a historic moment and a new era in railway transport. He praised China's Belt and Road Initiative project using the railway to link Europe, China, Asia and the Middle East. He said the line has reduced the journey time between China and Turkey from a month to 12 days. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.